Hey everybody, let's talk more about rigging. So I finally got a link to the UMA Blender file. It's very old, so I don't know if this is the most recent one, but it's got a lot of stuff to chew on anyway, so let's go ahead and look at it. UMA uses skeleton augments. It uses armature changes to do every deform that it does. And the more I look at it, the more impressed I get. And I think that it might be possible to polish this into something I can use pretty easily and quite well. Also, I just switched over to OBS Studio, so if you notice any changes in the quality or whatever, it's probably that. Let me know if you can hear buzzing in the microphone or anything. The sound leveling is different in Studio, I don't know why. I'll also be doing some streaming now and then. I don't know what the protocol is for telling people that you're streaming. If any of you have an idea, let me know. But I'll probably stream every Saturday. This would be a stream if I was doing streaming. So we're going to look at the UMA model and the UMA armature. First off, I'm going to just dismiss the UMA model. It's not a bad model by any means. It's actually quite sharp, especially if you need to replace pieces of it. But it is just absolutely not suitable for what I need. So we're not going to be talking about the strengths or weaknesses of the UMA model itself. We're going to be focusing on the armature. You may notice that there are a lot of dots. And your first instinct is, oh my gosh, why would they ever need to bend, the arm here? These are not bending bones. These are scaling bones. So this bone rotates the arm. Well, that's an interesting bug. Weird. Oh, it's facing the opposite way. I see. So this would rotate the arm. This would scale the arm. Now, there are a lot of reasons why this is good and why it works well. And I was very impressed when I saw this. I didn't think of it until I saw it. But as you can see, you can scale the arm and then it won't do any skewing or affect its children, which is a brilliant idea. So basically, the parent bone here, which would normally be the only bone in this location, has no mesh attachments, or I don't think it does. It's this sub-bone that has the mesh attachments. And that allows you to do anything you want with this sub-bone. You can scale it, you can move it around, anything you'd like. You can even rotate it and get yourself a weird skewed arm, whatever. And that's a very powerful idea. The idea that the bone that is linked up to the children is not the bone that you're scaling. And that alone is worth the price of admission. Given that the price of admission is 0, a lot of stuff is worth the price of admission. If we want to look at the actual structure of the skeleton, when we go into here and take a look, I'm pretty sure that the layers have different, the bones have different setups here, but I'm not sure how it's done. I don't know very much about Blender. I was under the impression that some of these were set up to rig in one way and not in others, and that would automatically propagate into Unity. But that might be the scripts they're using and not the actual bones. If you know, let me know. So I'm going to go ahead and just analyze every single bone in this body. There are like 100 of them, 156. So let's get started. Fortunately, I only have to analyze about half of them, a little bit more than half. So the first thing I note is that there is no toe bone. You just have all of the toes animated at the same time. I think that's fine for most games. I think it's probably fine for mine as well. So that's probably what I'll do. I won't be able to use this exact skeleton for a variety of reasons, but I'll be creating my own with the exact same principles, and it should be fine. Then we got just a basic ankle slider. This is interesting because none of these have the secondary bones that I would have expected if you wanted to be able to morph the feet. So when you are morphing the feet, you're also going to be morphing the toes. And the toe bone isn't on exactly the same shape, so it's an interesting situation. It's not exactly on the same axis. I guess maybe they didn't think the feet were worth any kind of adjustment, but I might have something to do with that because I'm going to have a lot of aliens, and my aliens might have more complicated feet, digitrod legs, stuff like that. And it would be nice if I could have bone deforms to form those kinds of complex shapes. So I'll have to think about that some more. The shin looks like it is the standard setup for this system, where it's a bone that does the scaling, separate from a bone that does the morphing. Yep. So I think we're going to see that a lot, and I think it's great. The question in my mind is how well this responds to grabbing, and the answer is not very. So what I was thinking is the core concept of this bone is a little bit, it's good, but it's a little bit unfinished in my mind. It might just be because I haven't thought it through yet. To me, it seems like it would be better to put this bone at the center of the muscle, over here somewhere. And that the reason for that would be, why is it glitching around? Maybe the new OBS is interfering with my mouse somehow. But the reason for that would be that when you're scaling this, you'll get a scale that is more bone-centric. More muscle-centric. In the shins, actually, in the shins, it makes sense that it's in this spot. I guess I had it reversed in my head. We want it in the center of the bone because the bones don't grow very much. It's the rest of the muscle that grows. But even then, this bone has control over the entirety of the lower leg. And that's interesting to me because the lower leg actually has 2.5 major morph points. It's got the size of the muscle, which this is the bicycler muscle, if you'd like it. It's got the weight of the fat, and the weight of the fat is very different depending on how much you've got, obviously. But if you were going to scale up the fat, you wouldn't be just scaling this up. You'd be bringing this down into a heavier ankle structure. But you can't really scale them separately the way it is right now. I might experiment with adding in a second bone for fat-related scaling of some kind. And the other half is the knee. One of the disappointing things about this mesh is that its knee structure is so bad. But that's not a terrible knee structure if you're looking to go low poly, but you're not going to get any definition out of this knee. So they didn't even include any morph bones or anything. It's just bending right at the knee. I don't know how much I'm going to need to morph kneecaps, but how the muscle and fat falls around each joint is a critical part of the realism, and the fact that the knee doesn't morph in response to the morphing of the muscles means that you're going to get very soft muscles. Let me show you. Upper leg is built the same as the lower leg in terms of having a central skeleton with a morph bone in it. But if you morph the skeleton up like this and like this, you can see how soft that is. It just kind of swings into the knee. I don't know whether I would change the weighting of that or whether I would add in a second bone. It's hard for me to tell, but the point is that that's not how muscle looks. Obviously, some of that can be solved with texturing, but I might experiment with trying to solve it using bone shape. So here, I think this is a butt bone. Yep, this is the butt bone. So I guess this bone is used for both butt size and jiggle physics. But the interesting thing about this idea is that it's something I actually have to study because the butt scaling is not very good in both this mesh and others. If we switch this to individual origins, then you'll see what I mean. So I don't need it that blown out. There we are. So if you get heavy and you get to be someone who's got quite a back end, then what you normally would see is not that. So there's an interesting situation in the butts and in the boobs and in the bellies. They act differently when they reach specific sizes. And the bone morphing that I'm seeing here can't keep up with that. Maybe there should be 2 bones. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. I also wonder whether these bones are intended for animating physics or not. I'll have to keep that in mind too, because I have no interest in animating the physics of the various bones. So this is the root bone, hips. And that's probably one that would very rarely get animated, but it certainly wouldn't get scaled. Or if it did get scaled, it would be easier to scale the whole object rather than just that bone. And then we've got some actual structural, animatable bones. Why is it doing this? Is there some kind of script running in the background of this blend file that's causing it to tweak out, or is it OBS? I'll have to look into that some more. But this bone is very important because it comes attached to several morph points. So here is one of the morph bones, lower back adjust. Ooh. So the lower back adjust is one you would probably use a lot for heavy characters. And let's see how it looks when you are moving the bone around. Interesting. It has a child bone attached to it. So if we get the child bone, this one is the lower back belly. I zoomed in there, sorry. So yeah. So I don't like the results of these two bones very much. It's not that they're awful, it's that I think they could be a lot better. First things first, I think that the rib and the belly should have separate bone morphs. Where if you want to gain weight, you would scale the ribs and it would also scale the belly, or something similar to that. And if you wanted to lose weight, you would just lose it from the belly and your ribs would stand out. I'll have to think about that some more. But the big reason I don't like this is because it skews. So when I scale this belly bone up, come on, belly bone. God damn it. There we are. When I scale this belly bone up or down, it really tweaks in towards the center of the mesh. And that is... that's a huge issue because as you gain weight, it starts to look less and less realistic and more blown out. Now, partly this can be solved by rotating as well as scaling. But in the end, you're going to have to try and figure out a way to do this in a way that it looks realistic. And partly that's definitely going to be scaling other parts of the body as well to keep that soft shape, like, gotta start scaling out the legs and stuff like that. And that works out pretty well, actually, if you look at that. If you scale the whole leg and not just the X and Y axis, if you also scale the Z axis along the bone, you do get some folding in there, which might be something we look at later. I'll have to look into that some more. But if you look at pictures of fat people, or if you are one, you already know, this isn't really how the belly sits on people, male or female. It's got a lot of issues, lack of structure in the back, unrealistic mass allocation here. It's not a great layout. So my question is that more a problem with the exact weighting, the exact weight painting of the bone, or is that more of a problem with where the bone is? Because it might be possible to have this bone work out fine if it's moved to another location. So if we think about the way in which scaling and moving radiates, the objects, the verts that are closest to the bone change the least, and the verts that are furthest from the bone change the most. So if we take that in mind and we go into edit mode here and we just move this bone like back here, we'll get a different result. I don't think it'll be better, but we'll get a different result where the character will blimp out in a different fashion. And you can see that it's got the same problems on the x-axis. It's really sensitive for some reason. But here, well, it still needs a lot of work. Maybe the x-axis is just unwinnable. I'm not really familiar with how love handles work as they come up the back here. So I'm not sure. But whenever I look at something like this, when all of the bones are aligned across the center bone like this, I start to think, That's probably not the best place to put it. If we put it somewhere else, we'll get a different dynamic. We'll get it moving in a different way as we scale it or rotate it. So for example, if I put the bone in front and then scale it, scaled down on the x-axis, we'll get a slightly different look. But it looks like the back just isn't painted onto the bone at all. So you're not going to get any sort of back fat out of this bone. But as we move it forward, you can clearly see where the painting is damaged here. You'd have to repaint the whole thing if you wanted to do this sort of customization. But I can't help but think that this would be really useful, especially when it comes to rotating, because as it is, the belly just grows outwards and doesn't properly, it doesn't sit properly very well. And I think a lot of that could be fixed by using a rotation rather than anything else. And if we're doing a rotation, then how it rotates is really affected by where it sits, both in terms of vertical and in terms of horizontal. I mean, this way and this way. So if we go back into the edit and we bring it down like this, we rotate, you can see how it skews a lot more at the top and a lot less at the bottom, because we brought the fulcrum down. But if we bring it way up like this, then when we rotate, we get a huge result at the bottom. It also affects the scaling, because it'll scale further the farther away it is, and now this is quite far away, and we've got a much more saggy belly. This would obviously not be good for people who are slightly pudgy, but this wouldn't be a bad sort of shape for people who are quite heavy. Yeah, that's much more realistic. But let's go ahead and undo all of that. Can we undo far enough? We cannot. I've damaged the skeleton. No, no. That's fine. We'll move it back in manually and pretend it never happened. I'm not going to be saving it. Who cares? The other bone here was the lower back adjust, which was the part that wasn't painted. Not in edit mode, please. Pose mode. Oh, R, Alt S. There we are. So the lower back adjust is what scales out the part here where you get your handles, your love handles and your fat. I think that this is a pretty good choice, but it doesn't allow you to have really big hips. And that's not great, because as you get heavier, your hips definitely get wider, and that's just not something that's in this bone structure. So I might add like a bone here or something. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. But if we combine these two bones, then what we get is whenever we scale up the hips, or the back rather, we also scale up the if nothing else, it would be better to have that bone. There we are. We also scale up the belly some, and of course the belly can be scaled up separately. So there are a lot of things going on here, but the belly bone is still the worst of the bones. I guess I can't say I'm surprised. Most people have no interest in having heavy characters in their video games, but I really want to allow for a wide variety of people. This is just the standard upper spine, and then here we have the spine adjust. I'm not entirely sure what good this does. I would probably make it a rib cage adjust, which is probably what it's intended to be. Does it have a better reaction when you move it? Well, not that way. Not sure how good that bone is. I'll have to think about that some more. And here we have the upper body. That's fine. And then the spine 1 adjust, which is definitely the rib cage, right? Well, it's the rib cage, and I guess that's just an overall beefiness modifier, which is fine. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I like that bone. I wonder if it's in the right spot though. I guess it depends on whether you want more back heavy characters or more fore heavy characters. If we move it back, then the chest will expand further. If we move it forward, then the back will expand more. One of the things to note here, though, is that it doesn't actually map to the bust. For some reason, the bust is attached to the end of this bone, which means that you have to be careful to adjust these separately. My instinct would be to attach the bust to the ribcage bone, so that when you scale the ribcage, you move the bust bones out as well. Well, let's get to the part that is not safe for work, sort of. The bust. So the bust bones are 2 for each side, left inner breast and left outer breast. So the outer breast is that, and the inner breast is this. Okay. Interesting choices. Well, I can worry about how I want to represent busts in my own time, but I don't think those are the bones I'm going to use. I'll have to think about it some more. So this is an interesting bone, the left trapezius. So I think that this bone is intended to be what gives you this beefy look, right? So if you scale it up, you get extra beef on your character. I'm interested in why it is exactly where it is. It doesn't seem to be... I mean, it's got some unusual... Is it more about the back? No? Interesting. I can definitely see this bone being useful, but it's not mapped to the upper chest bone. This is a separate thing. I would think that you would do either one or the other, or you'd map this onto that, but it's actually mapped here. Oh, is this just a... No. This might just be a bone to keep the shoulder intact when you're animating. Yeah, that seems pretty likely. I bet that's good. Never mind. It's an animation bone, but it animates by not being there. I think that's a pretty good way to do it. I was thinking it was a scaling bone. But because it's an animation bone, you can't scale with it, at least not very well. I guess what happens is you scale up this, and then you also scale up this. And you try and get a good result. I'll have to think about that. If you know why that bone exists and whether or not how well it interacts with the idea of beefy people, let me know. So here, of course, is the mass of the shoulder, and this is a very good bone to have. I'm not sure, once again, I'm not sure that it's in the right spot. It seems to me that it would go better if it were forward a little bit, like this, and then maybe down a little bit, like this. So if it was like this, then when you scale it... Oh, God damn, what is wrong with this? It's really scaling weird. Like pops all around. When you do it like this, you get this shoulder that bulges. I don't know. I'll have to think about it some more. Maybe that's too much. Yeah, I guess it's too much. Maybe it's best where it is. So this is the main arm bone. Oop. Which is fine. This is the bicep bone, which is fine. It's all fine. Okay, so this is actually split into a couple of different places. We've got this, and then we've also got a second animation bone. No. Somewhere. We've got 2 bones that are perfectly overlapped, apparently. Okay, so there's the animation bone. It does run the whole length. It just doesn't look like it. So this is the forearm wrist. This is the twist. Did it say twist, not wrist? Is this twist a scaling bone, or is this specifically used to try and balance the arm when you're rotating the hand? To be honest, I could believe either. Not sure. Let me know if you know exactly how that bone works. Left forearm twist adjust. They don't seem to have a left forearm. Oh, there it is. So that's the primary left forearm. He must have added these twist bones for a reason. They might just be balancing to make it so that your hand When your hand rotates, it rotates okay. Why? Or why? So when you rotate the hand bone, you can see that what we've got is a very, very strict set of maps right there at the wrist. That's going to give you a lot of problems if you are trying to be realistic. So more loops there would be a good idea, but we're not using this mesh, so it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to figure out how that interacts with the bones that are for the twist. Don't know. So the finger bones look like they're totally normal. I don't see any adjusts in the finger bones, which is fine. You've got an Adam's apple? No, that's not. That's a. It's the other trapezius. So here's your neck, but your neck has at least one other bone in it. I am beefy neck. So a lot of the times I'm not sure about the choices he's made in where the bone points. This points along the neck, which means that as you scale up, if you scale up on the local y-axis along the bone, you end up pushing the neck up into the head. Obviously, I think that he was thinking everyone would only scale on the x and z axes, and not on the y-axis, although even then there's some serious stuff going on here. The neck is something I am really concerned about because it's got to react in a wide variety of ways. You've got necks that that come out like this and merge into a heavy shoulder. You've got people who have thin necks that actually narrow like this. You've got heavy people who have like a neck that basically just blurs into the rest of their body. It's odd to me to try and do all of that with just one neck bone. I don't think it was a priority for him. Oh, the guy who made this, he was just one guy and he did a great job. If I didn't mention his name in the beginning, I'll mention it down below. I'm afraid I don't remember it at the moment. Actually moving this creates some interesting neck shapes if you're doing robots or something. I think the neck needs a lot more points. I think the neck needs some of these bones. And I'll have to experiment with that. So up here, he's got the head, and it's obviously got a lot of bones in it. He's got a lot of bones for adjusting the ear. Inner and outer, I guess. Oh, is this animating? And this is... yeah, that might be it. But this is an interesting difference from the default MakeHuman model for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is the default MakeHuman model isn't built to scale the face at all, but another one is it has these giant antennas that come down that I couldn't figure out the purpose of, and apparently neither could this guy because he didn't put it in. He didn't put them in at all. He did make some questionable choices in comparison, though. The MakeHuman bone has some really nice options. For example, this bone here, which controls the upper lips, in MakeHuman, it reaches all the way back to the back of the skull. It starts here and comes way forward. And I remember being mystified the first time I saw it, but then realizing what it did is it prevented skew. So because this is so close to the lips, we're going to get a lot of skew, well, especially if we can't control... oh, this isn't actually the upper lips anyway. It's not actually bonded to them. That's interesting. How do you animate the lips, then? Well, in the previous one, these upper lips were all tied to a long bone, and that meant that when you moved your lips left or right or up or down, they wouldn't skew very much. They'd skew in a realistic fashion. If the bone is real close to your lips, then what's going to happen is you're going to end up with lips that tilt very rapidly, and that's not very realistic. This case is a little bit odd, though. There are no driving bones for the upper lips. They're, in fact, bonded to the top of the skull, and you have to animate each one separately. Sure, that's something that can be done, but it's not... it doesn't feel very intuitive. My instinct would be all three of these bones should link back to a single animation driver bone, like in most sorts of systems. That's the same here. We've got a jawbone, which is great, but what we don't have is a bone which can drive the lower lips. So in the MakeHuman skeleton, this bone comes down and then it comes up, and this part here drives the lower lips and allows you, again, for a very realistic sort of dropping of the lower lip. And that gave us some really nice, realistic facial expressions. Now, obviously, there are a lot of adjustment bones here. The mandible adjust bone. This would be so much easier if this wouldn't freak out. That's so weird. I don't know why it does that. So, interesting. Because it's not actually linked to the lower lips or anything like that, you've got to be more careful when you actually deploy it, because your lower lip doesn't come forward with it. So you've then got to actually move all of these lips forward. But if you do that, it's an animation. Those are animation drivers. So what we have here is a situation where the animation driver bones might have to be... Well, I guess you can bring forward the adjustment bones. Yeah, so if I bring these forward... Okay, so you can bring forward the adjustment bones without the driver bones. So that would allow you to create a jaw that is stronger. Yeah, the mesh doesn't really like it, especially right there, but it's possible. Here we have lower left mandible and lower left mandible adjust. So what is this bone? It's linked to the jaw. Is it just a deform catch so that the jaw doesn't deform badly? That seems likely. I don't see any reason why you'd ever want to animate it on its own. But, you know, maybe. The left mandible adjust, a maxillar adjust, is jowls. Yep. So we have some cheekbones. We got one for animating and one for driving the adjustment. Same with the nose. We've got loads and loads of nose bones. Now these nose offsets, these nose animator bones are actually really a good idea, but I don't think that they're set up in a good... I don't think they're set up in a great spot for mapping purposes. As you can see, they deform the cheekbone, but they don't actually pull the nose out. So you can't animate the nose crinkling with those bones. I have to wonder what you would animate with those bones. Presumably you animate the nose crinkling with this bone? Oh. It would be tough. It would be real tough. So there's a couple of shortcomings that I think I see in this skeleton. It could be because this is like a 2-year-old blend file, but it also could be because they weren't thinking about facial animations at the same depth that MakeHuman does, which is fine. It's not like they need to have detailed facial animations. One of the things is this face is really low poly, and detailed facial animations may just not be in the cards at all. So this is the bone for the nose. The question is, why does he have both an animator bone and a adjuster bone? I would think that you would only need an adjuster bone. What is the animator bone going to do? When do you animate the bridge of your nose? When you get punched? So here we see one of the issues with this skeleton that's also an issue in every other skeleton. The eye socket is not particularly mobile, but that's easy to solve in this regime. You just introduce a bone here and map the eye socket to it, and it should work fine. So that's what I'll end up doing. And then here we have a ton of these eyebrow bones. One of the things about MakeHuman that's different than this is the eyebrow bones from MakeHuman are this like curly cue that just goes, and you actually animate it from out here, and then as you go in, you animate more more delicately towards the inside of the eyebrow, and that allows you to do facial expressions very realistically without any effort at all. The problem with this approach is that you have to very carefully animate every single one of these bones to get your facial expressions, and you can't really use any of the power of rotation. So, the previous one had a bone here, and you would press R to rotate, and it would animate the whole eyebrow. But in this, you've got to, if you press R and rotate, putting aside the fact that it doesn't grab correctly, you're going to have to be very careful how you do it. You can also move these, but there's probably no difference between moving them and rotating them. And of course, there's the bone here for scaling. I wonder why he put them so far back in the head. I think that the reason is because he thought that rotating this would be what you would do to animate the facial expression. So be like, hey, I'm scared, I'm angry. And because you're rotating it, the further back it is, the less skewing there is. If he was thinking of using translation animations, then it doesn't matter where the hell he put it, because it'd just be flat translation. So that's an interesting situation. But either way, is there any reason for the adjust bone to be this far back? It seems to me that it would make sense for the adjust bone... Well, if we're scaling up the adjust bone to actually make our eyebrow stronger, I would think it should be even further back to prevent skew. Maybe like this. Well, not way up there. How the hell did you get way up there? Like this. Micromagnon. I'm not sure. I think that he and I probably just have different philosophies on how to handle this stuff. But I definitely learned a lot. The core idea here is great. And let's see what his... So his head adjust doesn't actually adjust anything. It's just a bone that he never hooked up. Interesting. Maybe it drives something else, like there's a script in Unity that reads those values and changes some others. But that means that you can't change the height of the head or the width of the skull very easily. You'd have to do... Oh, I'm in edit mode. I'm just being stupid. Sorry, I lied. This is actually... Probably works fine. Pose, please. Yeah, it works fine. I was stupid. So here you can see there is a little bit of stuff that I want down here on the neck for its own thing. But fundamentally, this scaling is probably not in a very good spot. As you can see, you end up pushing the whole head forward. If the bone was here, then when you scaled up, you wouldn't have quite so much push forward compared to pushing backwards. Of course, in reality, this bone is intended to scale on just the X and Z axes. Scale X. No? Scale X. I wish this would behave. There we are. Jesus. So you can scale X. But since it's not connected to the ears, you'd have to move the ears out at the same time that you scale on the X-axis, or else you'll end up with ears inside your head, which might be cool for an alien species, I suppose. And if you scale on the Z-axis, yeah, that's pretty good. Since it's mostly going to be limited to scaling on the X and the Z-axis, I suppose it's in a pretty good spot. Moving it along the Y-axis would make it possible, this way, would make it possible to scale on that axis, but I don't know why you would. What I am surprised by is how much of the face is controlled by that one bone. I mean, this one bone controls all of this stuff. Look at all of this stuff. I would think that that would be something that you would want to drive using other adjustable bones. For example, foreheads. Sometimes they come out, sometimes they slope back. Sometimes they're wider, sometimes they're narrower. So there are a lot of bones that I would consider that are missing from this formula. And I think that the reason is because he didn't want to attach bones to adjustment bones. He wants every adjustment bone to stand on its own. But if you are planning to scale the whole head and you've got like 8 other bones that scale tiny pieces of it, then you will have this annoying system where you've got to scale the whole head and then also move 8 annoying bones. And that is an annoying amount of work. But I need those adjustments, so I'm going to have to figure out some way to do it. Maybe I'll take on that annoying amount of work. One of the things that's really surprised me is that the cheekbones here, they don't seem to be very... I guess what happens is because the whole head animates, he has bound the cheekbones, because this bone here animates the whole head or drives the whole head, the cheekbones are only partially bound to it. Now, this is a problem I ran into a lot. When you bind several bones to the same verts, or vice versa, several verts to the same bone, obviously the weight of each change decreases. And that means that you end up with bones that are not as powerful as they once were. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can end up with, a very delicate adjustment if you know what you're doing. I don't think that this weighting is very good, but it might just be because his facial structure doesn't really do very well at cheekbones. It's optimized for a smooth flow around the face. It's not optimized for people with hollowed out cheeks. Right. So I learned a lot, and there are some places I'm going to be changing and adjusting and trying to figure out what to do better. Making my own skeleton. I'm not going to be using this one. But let me know if there are any hidden secrets to this skeleton that you think I've missed, or if you know of a reason why this is a terrible approach and I should do something else, or you have any other advice on the matter. I hope that next week, Saturday, next week, I'll be able to release a character system where you can create random characters. And that will probably not involve clothes, so maybe I'll have to label that as, Barbie doll nudity ahead. Have a good one. Oh, and I'll probably stream on next Saturday, maybe? I don't know, maybe sometime during the week. Let me know how that works, if any of you stream or watch streamers and have any advice on that, because I really haven't done it before.